Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery that mediocrity can pay to greatness. Many people forget the last half of this quote from Oscar Wilde, because just saying the first half is almost a compliment to the imitator. If you say, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, it makes the imitator seem as if he's being sincere. But when you add the second half, what it shows is that it is just someone attempting to mimic something they'll never be. Now that's very important in today's video, because Alec Baldwin has rubbed the people on the right the wrong way many, many times because of his portrayal on Saturday Night Live of the president in a very negative light. And that's fine. Alec Baldwin is who he is. He's an actor. That's his job. His job is to be somebody he's not. Now, he's had all sorts of other problems. We're not going to get into that. But he did say something in one unguarded moment of honesty. Alec Baldwin said something that everybody on the right needs to pay attention to, because it's the truth. And if people were listening to it outside of their emotions, they would realize he gave up the game. He blew it for the left. He destroyed their narrative in 2 sentences. Let me share that with you. People were calling into question the propriety of him portraying the president after the president has tested positive for coronavirus. So this is from Fox, and I'm just going to read verbatim what they wrote and what he said, the exact quote. Baldwin was joined by Jim Carrey. One second here. Sorry about that. Baldwin was joined by Jim Carrey, who was portraying Joe Biden for a parody of last Tuesday's presidential debate. During the sketch, both men made lighthearted jabs at the news that Trump had tested positive for the coronavirus. Baldwin also shared a photo of himself in a face mask and full Trump costume prior to the airing to encourage people to watch. Now, of course, everyone on the right, getting all emotional, gets upset about this. The sketch rubbed some of the Trump supporters the wrong way, to which Baldwin issued a response in a lengthy video shared on Instagram Sunday. The 62-year-old actor noted that because people aren't being told officially that Trump is, quote-unquote, gravely ill, the sketch simply towed the line at worst. He praised the minds behind SNL for historically being cognizant of what is and isn't appropriate. Now here's the quote. You ready for this? Quote, "If there was ever the suggestion that Trump was truly gravely ill and people said Trump is really in trouble, then I would bet you everything I have that we wouldn't even get near that in terms of the content of the show," Baldwin said. "They would have done something else. I've seen that happen before." Wait a minute. Hold on. Back the truck up. You mean to tell me that getting diagnosed with coronavirus doesn't make you gravely ill? It doesn't make you gravely ill. But what have we seen on CNN for the last 3, 4, 5 days or whatever? Oh, his oxygen dropped. Oh, this happened. Oh, no, it's the end of the world. Should we be thinking about transition of power or the continuity of government or all this kind of stuff, when the man's going to be likely discharged later tonight, if not tomorrow morning? Oops. The president with coronavirus is not gravely ill. Now, official numbers from Worldometer as of today, world numbers, 35 million, quote unquote, giant air quotes, asterisks, cases, really more like infections, 35 million, 35.6 million, on a planet of 7 with a B, billion. 7 billion. What this comes out to is, if you would take all of the cases, and that means healthy people, that means anybody who's ever had it, gotten over it, 0.5%. 0.5 0.5% of the world penetration. If this were a quote-unquote bioweapon, worst bioweapon ever. Maximum penetration, 0.5%, and of that group, 95% perfectly fine. 1 million deaths out of a planet of 7 billion with a B people in 9 months. And just so everybody's clear about what pandemic means. Pan means all, as in spread throughout the world. It hasn't hit Antarctica, so technically it's not a pandemic. In some places, it's virtually non-existent. So, this having been said, we have another topic to cover. And it's a big deal. It's out of Venezuela. And it has to do with the Bank of England and the $1 billion worth of gold that they are holding. That's the property of Venezuela. Now, the U.S. tried to bully them and lost. Believe it or not, the Maduro government has won an appeal in England. A British appeals court ruled in favor of the Venezuelan government of Nicolas Maduro and said the legal fight over the future of $1 billion in gold stored in the vaults in the Bank of England should be reconsidered. The judges Monday reversed a lower court ruling that the UK had unequivocally recognized opposition leader Juan Guaido as interim president, giving the Maduro administration another shot at getting control of the gold. The UK government statements on Guaido don't reflect the reality of London's continued diplomatic relations with Maduro. Really? That's interesting. The justices led by Judge Stephen Mayle said, here's a quote, "The UK's recognition is to my mind ambiguous, or at any rate less than unequivocal," Mayle said in the ruling. Venezuela's central bank sued the BOE for access to the bullion, which has been in limbo since U.S. officials successfully lobbied their British counterparts last year to block Maduro's attempt to withdraw the assets. The UK government last year said it recognizes Guaido as Venezuela's interim president until new, credible elections can be held, but Mayle said the Foreign Office should be asked to clarify whether it accepts that Maduro exercises power on the ground as president. Quote, "The lower court judgment had led to a completely unrealistic situation." Siraj Sawala, a lawyer for the Maduro-appointed central bank, said in a statement the administration in control of the mint and day-to-day operations of the central bank in Caracas, quote, "were being told that they could no longer deal with very substantial central bank deposits in London." Quote, "The UK court is not going to hand over the gold to the Maduro regime," Newman said. We'll see about that. We will see about that. Now, many continue to call into question my narrative, as they describe it, of what's happened in Venezuela. Well, the events on the ground should prove it to you. By now, don't you think the people would have risen up? The people would have overthrown the man if things were really as bad as they're saying it is, and it's the result of his policies. We are now end of 2020, end of 2020. All this narrative and nonsense started 5 years ago. Almost 6, really. And Bloomberg released in February of 2019 a timeline. And I'd like to go over this timeline with you guys and spend a little bit of time, because in it there are some very key pieces of information that would make you call into question anything DC has had to say about this. Primarily the timing. Because when you look at the charts, no matter which one you look at, you would believe that if socialism is the cause, what you would believe is that socialism took over in 2013 and 2014. That's what you would believe. See, here's when the big collapse happens right here. So you would say, oh, wow, back here when they were doing great, inflation was low and revenue was up, boy, that must have been capitalism. Nope. Chavez took over back here, where the orange meets the red line. That's when Hugo Chavez, Chavismo, took over. And I'm going to talk about some different reasons because I have some new charts that they've put out that show this. This is one of the newer ones. What it adds in here is imports, which is the green line, and a light blue line that talks about international reserves. And what this talks about is them pulling money out of foreign banks starting back in 2008 and putting money in their own banks, which was really the big offense. The green line is imports, and as you can see, the imports went right along with their money because that was the one big problem Venezuela had that they were attempting to fix, is that they imported way too many things. And we have some images. Let me see if I can find the right one. I might not have kept it up. Hold on. Here it is. It was right next to it. You see, here's some more pictures of starving Venezuelans from back in 2014 and 15. And they've taken some of these empty bags and they've glued them to a piece of cardboard. All of this stuff was imported. Now that's not going to change, no matter who's in charge in Venezuela. Not at all. Now, what's produced in the country, what's not produced in the country, and who's in charge of it, and who gets the profit from it, if DC would have its way, that would change for sure. Absolutely. But this is a chart that shows extreme poverty in Venezuela. Let's see if I can, there we go. And once again, when you look at the years, you would think, wow, this must have been socialism back here, and this must have been when capitalism took over here, because you can see how poverty goes down with capitalism. Nope. Absolutely not. They did something economically that pissed off Washington, D.C. and big oil. And that's what this is really about. Now, the timeline that we were talking about, they go all the way back to 85 and the price crash back there and the Caracazo riots because they actually had to start charging for gasoline. Now, this is when capitalism was in charge. This is pre-Chavez 11 years. The country was in a tailspin. And he tried to take over back in 92, and that failed. 94, he got pardoned. And then met Castro. What they're trying to do is paint the timeline of how Venezuela failed and how they're really our enemy now, and there's some huge threat. The 98 crash, and then Chavez gets elected. You see, they don't explain how that can possibly be. How if the guy was this evil, terrible, horrible socialist in charge of everything, how does he get elected in 98? With 56% of the vote. And of course, they have to show him with a picture of Saddam Hussein. I mean, this is what they do. This is absolutely what they do. Chavez on the New York Stock Exchange in 99. Wrote a new constitution, same year. And this is some issue they're trying to take with him redoing the coat of arms, when virtually it's the exact same coat of arms, with just different words written in the bottom, changing it to the República Bolivariana de Venezuela, the Bolivarian Republic. So here's where things get interesting. 2000. Cuba Oil Deal. Chavez strengthened ties with Fidel Castro by providing Cuba with 53,000 barrels a day at cut-rate prices. Years later, when oil prices were on a tear, meaning going up, Chavez started offering oil to Caribbean nations at preferential terms under a program known as PetroCaribe to gain influence in the region or to take care of his neighbors, depending on how you look at that. He went as far as accepting local products, such as bananas or sugar, in exchange for oil. Imagine that. Bartering. Wow. You need oil, and okay, we need these goods. We'll take sugar, we'll take what you have. Now, here was the the next time the U.S. got involved, 2002. This is Pedro Carmona. They tried to take Venezuela back over, and they failed because this guy issued the Carmona Decree. He took over for a very, very short time, matter of days, and declared martial law. He was immediately deposed by the military, part of which he used to instigate the coup. And I'll just read this just to explain it. Distrustful of state-owned, meaning DC-controlled oil company PDVSA's top management, Chavez began stacking the board with loyalists, meaning he got rid of all of Chevron's people, all of DC's people, prompting an outcry from the company's existing management. Venezuela's biggest business federation of labor unions called a general strike in April to support the oil company's autonomy. This happened at a time when members of the military, now listen to this part, this is really important. Members of the military were becoming uncomfortable with Chavez's growing ties to Cuba. Then an opposition march on April 11 turned violent after it changed course and headed toward the presidential palace, where Chavez supporters were holding their own rally. Chavez supporters, wow. Shots broke out, and by evening, 19 people were dead, including both supporters and opponents of the government. Prominent businessman Pedro Carmona, who had helped organize the strike, named himself president. Sound familiar? Detained Chavez and dissolved the National Assembly. Dissolved. Congress. Took over and got rid of Congress. But much of the military and the population were still with Chavez, and a counter-coup quickly launched. Chavez was restored to office, and Carmona fled the country. Now, a lot of the people that were on this guy's side back in 2002, are part of the opposition now. Machado, Corina Machado, is one of these opposition leaders trying to depose Maduro at the moment. Then there was the oil strike. And here's where they talk about how Venezuela's oil production never fully returned to pre-strike levels of 3.3 million barrels a day. I have a chart for this. Let me find it. 1 second. We'll talk about them in a minute. Where is it? Don't tell me I lost it. Oh. Nope. Here it is. Found it. Sorry about that. Okay. So here's 2000. Here's 2001. Here's that way over here to the left, that number they're talking about. 3.3. So yeah, it did drop. But here's when Chavez finally, got rid of all the coups and got the country on course. Now, what do you see about the production? It stays constant. Steady Eddie income. That's what this was about. Chavez decided, you know what? We're going to lock our exports, lock our production at 2.4. Okay? Now, whatever happens with the price, happens with the price. But my job as the president of the country is to make sure we have a steady, predictable, controllable income. That's number one. All of this up and down with prices, that has to end. All this up and down with production, that has to end. It wasn't his job to supply the world with oil. That wasn't his job. His job was to take care of the Venezuelan people. This is what Big Oil didn't like. Because they had this crazy thought that the resources of that country didn't belong to the world. They belonged to Venezuela and should go to benefit the people of Venezuela. You see, this is a thought that not even these, and this is why I had this picture up. This is a thought that not even the squad has had yet. See, people look at these four people and say, okay, these are the worst socialists ever in the world. Not even close. Not even close to socialists. Because every plan they have still requires a giant heavy dose of capitalism. They just want to tax it more. But they still need all those big businesses earning all that big revenue. They just are trying to find a different way to divvy up that pie. And the reason I had these images up is this. The price of oil was going up and up and up and up. And people took this into questions like, well, why is Chavez, putting us through the ringer? Why is Chavez charging us more and more and more and more and more for oil? We could drive the price of oil down if he would just increase production, but he didn't do that. Why? Because his job was to take care of the Venezuelan people and get the best price he could. And he knew something. And that's why I brought up this article. Price what the market will bear, not what you think customers should pay. I'm going to give you a link to this so that you can read it. But basically, that's Capitalism 101. This is how price is determined. And what Chavez knew is that oil to DC, oil to America, there was this huge, insatiable thirst in this country. And that he thought, well, okay, we're going to see exactly what they're willing to pay. It's our oil. If they want it so bad, let's see what they're willing to pay. This is what DC has been doing for a long time, finding out what the market will bear on things. What are people willing to pay for it? What are people willing to pay for it? That's what this guy was all about. Now, why did I bring up this and why did I bring up this? Well, this has to go with what will the market bear. If this is my last bottle of water and this is my last slice of bread that I have in the world, and I don't know where I can get another slice of bread or another bottle of water, you're going to have to pony up a hell of a lot more than 1 kilogram of gold. I can't eat gold. I can't drink gold. And see, when it comes right down to it, that's the only thing that matters. And that's what circles us all the way back around to Chavez accepting sugar and bananas for oil. You have large imports of sugar and large imports of bananas and other things. You can make food. You can feed people. And they go into this nonsense with currency controls, and this gets farther off into the weeds about how this works, and they try to demonize the welfare programs that brought so many people out of poverty, that were in poverty under DC-controlled governance of Venezuela. It also shows here that they found out who the traitors were. They call it political blacklist, but the people that wanted to serve DC and big oil, not the people of Venezuela. Then, of course, the 2006 speech where he calls Bush the devil. And then here, listen to how they couch this. The Chavez administration began forcing foreign oil companies to accept higher taxes and smaller non-controlling stakes in oil projects. You should never have a foreign corporation have a controlling interest in any of your natural resources. That's just a bad idea. Exxon, Mobil, ConocoPhillips refused to accept the new terms and went into international arbitration where they lost. Silencing the media, once again, a DC-controlled media attempting to manipulate the people, as we've seen. Hollywood darling. And here's the best part. Here is the best part. People like to talk about Chavez as if he was a dictator, or Maduro as if he was a dictator. Listen to this. In his first electoral defeat in 9 years, Chavez lost a referendum that would have amended the '99 Constitution to abolish presidential term limits and end the central bank's autonomy. University students who were unaffiliated with Venezuela's opposition parties played a crucial role in defeating the initiative. Chavez did manage to remove term limits through a more limited referendum approved by voters in 2009. But wait a minute, how could this be under a dictator? How would he have lost? You see, it wasn't a dictatorship. By evidence of the fact that he put forth a policy and it got defeated by public opinion in 2007. Would a dictator have allowed such a thing? No, he went back, he reworded things, and he did get the term limits pushed through. But the autonomy of the central bank part, I think a lot of people in the U.S. talking about the Fed could, sympathize with Chavez over this, saying, well, you can't do this. Who was it that said, give me the power to issue a country's currency, and I care not who makes its laws? I forget who said that. That's what he was fighting with. Then we know what happened in 2008, and then, the reason that they had to go talk to Russia, go talk to Iran, go to Cuba, talk to China is because D.C. abandoned them. D.C. let big business ruin their country. And instead of saying, okay, you know what, this was inappropriate, let's work with these people. These guys were our allies. The entire time I was in the military, these guys, the Venezuelans, were our allies. In 2011, established they have the biggest oil reserves. Chavez reelected in 2012. You see, if socialism was so bad and so terrible for this country, there's so many things you could not explain. Why did not what happens here happen way back here? Because they were having an incredibly original thought. That you could say the mineral reserves of a country belong to the people. Imagine if the American people said every ounce of copper, every ounce of silver, every ounce of gold, every gallon of oil, everything we have dug out of the ground, no matter what, inherently belongs to us as a people. And we are entitled to the profits from it first. And yes, businesses can exist to bring those things to market, and they can earn a profit, absolutely. But we're not getting cut out of the mix anymore. We're not having our wealth stolen from us anymore. This is what happened in Venezuela. This is what this was all about. And this is why DC had to stand up this guy. And also why he failed. Because one of the great things that Chavez did was educate his people to what they were trying to do. This is exactly what happened the last 6 years with Venezuela. And anybody who thinks anything differently is simply just a puppet of the U.S. government. Regardless of who's in charge, because this started way back. You could take this, really, if you wanted to, all the way back to the Clinton administration. Clinton, Bush, Obama, and Trump has just continued it. Because big oil pumps big money into U.S. elections. And if there ever were a deep state, if there ever truly were a deep state in this country, look no further than the oil companies. Because they're the ones really pulling the strings. But they can be defeated, and we're seeing this. They can be defeated with a population that is educated, that understands these concepts. And capitalism, like I said, 101 tells you, price what the market will bear. And that's exactly what Chavez was doing, that they didn't like. These people have no clue what democratic socialism means. They're just hateful, spiteful people that just want their own way. So, like I said, I'll give you this link, driveyoursuccess.com. Read this, and then, of course, I'll give you the links to the images, and you can put it all together for yourself. But I will leave it there. But Bloomberg absolutely covered this and did it well. Like, share, subscribe.